Welcome to Golf and the Good Life, your guide to golf travel across the pond. I'm DJ Jones, he is Connor Evers, and today we are sharing some essential tips for golf trip captains. Whether you are leading a trip to Scotland or Scottsdale, or even if you're just tagging along, we think there's some valuable insights ahead for you. But before we get there, Connor, it was great to see you and the gang last week up at H&B HQ. What's the latest as we're winding down this very busy travel season?
Deej, likewise, pleasure to see ya as well. It was a great time in Cincy. Yeah, everything's kind of winding down a little bit more here and there once we get closer to the end of the season. I just finished Searching in St. Andrews. It's a pretty good book by Sean Zach. It's a kind of a time where Sean goes over, he works for Golf Magazine, goes over to St. Andrews and some other areas around the area for essentially a whole summer and writes about it. It was during when Live Golf started as well. So it's kind of a fun time. So if you're going over to St. Andrews, looking at potentially doing a trip, it's an easy read. Take a look at that book. It's a fun one. And a few of my groups, like always, shout out to them that have returned from expeditions across the pond. Members from Camp Creek Golf Club, Portage Country Club, Detroit Golf Club, Olympic Club, Indian Ridge Country Club, PJ West, and Pinehurst Country Club, not the Pinehurst, North Carolina, but in Denver. So shout out to all those groups that have returned. All of the field reports been looking fantastic overseas, and looking forward to the last month or a few weeks here coming up for the 2024 golf travel season, and looking forward to starting the more intimate planning for 25.
No doubt about it. And it's funny. I think every episode, I think that list of clubs gets longer and longer, and that's just a fraction of the clubs that we're serving overall at H&B. We're getting to the end of the season, and usually September, October, things kind of start to wind down a little bit. That that
Oh,
is, oh my gosh, it's the exact opposite. It's
yeah.
like everybody decided they wanted to travel in September of 2024. It's, we've had a hugely busy season already, and September is our busiest month of the year, and that's not normal, but it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Busy is a
Yeah.
good thing, and but it's just funny to see, the long list of clubs that are headed overseas, and the members that are enjoying golf and the good life. And great tip on Sean Zach's book. It is on my nightstand along with about six other books. I'm one of these people that I finish a book and then two more get added to my stack on the nightstand, so I don't ever make any progress. But I will get to it eventually. But back to today's episode. As mentioned, we are covering some essential tips for golf trip captains. If you are leading a trip across the pond or to even really just about anywhere, a lot of the tips today will just help for a smoother process in your both your planning and the travel itself. But even if you're not the group captain, it's still some good listening today. And the reason being is along the way, your captain is going to be making decisions or need different things from you. And it's really helpful for you to understand where they're coming from when they are coming to you for those things, or understanding the decision making that went into some of the things as far as your trip goes. And your captain will appreciate the fact that you paid attention. If your trip does not have a captain, nothing will cause that to get nowhere faster than trip by committee. You've got to have one person that is kind of the point person, that is making some decisions, that's kind of driving the ship forward. And so if you don't have a captain, you need a captain. It's a lot to manage, and it's not a task that's built for everyone. But that's also why a lot of captains, they get started, they think they're going to plan it out themselves, and they start doing some research and they realize, oh my goodness, I don't want to do this. I'm just going to hand this over to Connor, Mike, or Chris at H&B because I don't have time for this. And that's a very common decision. But Connor, speaking of kind of the planning process, we love to kick off these episodes with some of your insight as an expedition planning manager for us. When you get going with a captain in terms of early conversations, what's driving that conversation beyond just where do you want to go?
Right. I would say the first conversation with whoever this person may be is usually the captain that's kind of facilitating the trip. And really, we're having the conversation, a very candid conversation of just kind of what the trip looks like. And kind of the one big factor is, hey, what are the goals for the trip? What do you want to, get out of it? How much golf do you want to play? Just kind of putting the preliminary framework of what that kind of looks like from, a 30,000 foot view, if you will, over the trip. Like I said, how many rounds of golf do you want? How many days off? What do you want to do off the course? What type of dinners and all those good things that we kind of chat about. But a lot of times it comes from, the captain's perspective and what they want to do, and the dynamics, if you will, of what it is. So if it's a buddies trip, couples or family trip, our biggest advice is stick to that. The more times you kind of change the kind of layout of it, can kind of dilute the type of trip, if you will, and just kind of the vibe of it overall. Blending, some couples and family and single guys or what have you, it just kind of makes things a little bit more difficult. There just becomes a lot more different perspectives and opinions, where it's harder for the captain to kind of keep things organized and just keep everyone happy, because people want to do different things depending on what type of group it is. So just keep it couples, buddies, family, etc. And our always biggest advice is avoid that guy. So as Dee just said in multiple different blog posts, it's just being very honest and candid with kind of the listeners. If there's the guy that no one wants to play with on the Saturday morning game or the Sunday morning game, if you don't want to play golf with them at your local club on a Saturday, you sure as heck don't want them on an overseas golf trip to Scotland or Ireland or England. If you're trying to fill the trip, say if you're at 7 and you want to get to 8 and you're like, hey, should we invite them? Don't do it. Rather go with 7 and do a 4 ball and a 3 or something like that, rather than having that person on the trip. Again, being very honest and candid with the listeners right now when it comes to that. Their biggest advice is, don't be a passive captain. It can be a job. It is definitely work. Even if you are, enlisting a golf travel company such as Haversham and Baker, there are still opinions. There are still conversations. I like to say it is the captain is the CEO of the trip. There's kind of a line between getting opinions from who's on the trip, but also making and ultimately making the decisions. Obviously, the buck stops with the CEO, if you will. So, and it stops also with the captain of the trip, and that's what it should be. There should be some decisions that are made, so you can get so many different opinions, of where we should play, where we should stay, which is all good, but ultimately there needs to be a decision, and needs to be kind of just, hey, this is what we're doing. And again, if you are a passive captain, oh, we can do this, we can do that, it's just not gonna end well from that perspective. And I would also say, if you're just like, hey, I don't want to be a part of these decisions, I don't want to be the middle person, job's probably not for you. And there are sometimes we have to have some tough conversations with, some captains that originally signed up and said, hey, just say John Smith, John, you know, we're trying to do these things. It doesn't sound like you want to be in the middle of it. Is there someone else we can appoint, to be the captain? It's obviously a tough decision or tough conversation. It might be a little awkward, but we're doing it for the betterment of the total group, because there might be someone else that wants to have that responsibility. So that's kind of the perspective when it comes to planning. Anything else to add, Deej?
No, I think that's really great. I mean, I think that, like you said, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have to go to a captain and be like, "Are you really sure that this was
Mm-hmm.
what you signed up for?" But in the end, they will thank you for it, and the rest of the members of the trip will thank you for it, because the trip's going to be better as a result. In these decisions, if they get stuck in committee, you're just not going to get anywhere. And so you've got to keep that progress moving forward, and especially given that so many of the places that you're probably wanting to play, you need action right now. You want to
Mm-hmm.
play Royal Port Rush and we get a tea time, you got like 24 hours to have it together. And so there can't be a drawn out process when it comes time to actually nailing these things down for your itinerary. I think it all also kind of points back to the next tip, which is communication. I think the key thing for you to do as a captain, start a text thread, get everybody together on one place where you can accomplish a couple things. The first is, obviously, you can use that as a place to for pre-trip banter and to, build some camaraderie amongst everybody and to build the excitement. Sometimes folks go on these trips and they don't know each other. at all. And so it's a great way to, to kind of get that ice broken before you leave. You can send photos to the thread and, here we are in 3 months headed to this place. But the biggie really comes down to the key things that you, as the captain, need the rest of the group to understand and to be on the same page about. The number one has to be money. Nobody wants to talk about money. Nobody wants to talk about budget. I get it. It's completely uncomfortable. But for the sake of your trip, you've got to have that conversation. Ensure that everyone is on the same page in terms of here's what it's going to cost. Here are the extra things that we're going to encounter along the way, caddy fees, gratuities, tour guides, whatever it might be. And also establishing your expectations in terms of how the money is then handled from there. There are so many different reservations and things if you're out there doing it on your own that are getting paid for and keeping track of it all and who owes what. You've got to have a set finite, here's what I expect. We all have our golf travel groups, and we can probably all relate to there's always that one guy that slow plays the payment. Nobody's got time for that. You've set these expectations up front, and it's hugely important. You don't want to get overseas and have a couple guys that were maybe caught off guard by some expenses, and the rest of the group is doing one thing and they're kind of not. You want to keep everybody gelling, get everybody on the same page, have that money talk, no matter how much you don't want to. And it also points to another advantage with a golf travel company is you can divest yourself of that responsibility money-wise pretty easily by having a company involved that's handling those payments for you. The people on your trip are paying the company and you're not dealing with keeping track of who owes what. You're just getting rid of that mess altogether. And then the other last key thing is as the captain, when it comes to the communication, don't assume that your friends have read the proposal or understand the itinerary or know what you're doing. A lot of times they probably haven't. And so when it comes to those key bullet points, dates, when they need to get in, their arrival times, where you're playing, whatever the key things that folks need to know, cover it in your text thread or cover it on your email chain or whatever it might be. Because if you're assuming that John Smith has read the itinerary, decent chance he hasn't. You don't want to over communicate. I get it. We don't want to, clog everybody's text threads, but for the sake of your trip, make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, you said it great there. And I think expectations is the big thing. There's going to be potentially times that you may not be liked as the captain. Reading the proposal and reading the itinerary, making sure everyone's on the same page is so big. And I like how you brought that up. And that kind of goes into the next point, which is, flight arrivals. Again, you said maybe Scottsdale or Scotland. So if you're just for matter of fact, what we do, we'll just say you're arriving into Edinburgh and you're playing arrival day golf at Gullen. There sometimes is a narrow window of time of when the group needs to get there. A lot of times we say within an hour or so of everyone arriving. Perfect example. Let's say most of your group is on the East Coast, but you have a couple guys coming in from the West Coast. The East Coast folks will likely get in very early in the morning, while the West Coasters may not arrive till early evening. If there's no communication from the captain about, hey, this is our schedule on arrival, so you need to be in by this time, it can make for a rocky start to your trip. But another example, and the other side of this, and the other side of the coin, another group that I worked with this year, we had a tour of St. Andrews that was booked at 3 p.m. And the captain was super diligent with me and working with the group. And they said, everyone needs to arrive at 11 a.m. or before. And if not, you go the day before and you get a hotel on your own because we have this tour set up and everyone needs to be there. The coach will be able to pick you up, etc. So again, not being passive. If you're passive, you may have a little bit of some of those logistical, things that may come up, but to get it as clean as possible, be a little assertive of telling your guys and gals or whoever's on this trip, you need to be in at this certain time, and even departure too. I'm even not even mentioning that, but just be a little bit more assertive when it comes to those things, and the trip will get off to a good start. Again, if it's rival day golf, if it's a tour, or just anything you're doing in that first day.
Yeah, it's a great point, and again, it goes back to you don't wanna have one person that's off on an island, that everybody else has arrived, super early from the East Coast, and the one West Coast guy is coming in, 12 hours later, and now the rest of the group has spent all this time already on the trip. Maybe they're a couple Guinness deep, and now this other guy's rolling in, and again, just going back to setting those expectations, setting the standard. That captain who was like, "Get in by 11 o'clock." That's a great captain because understands that. Look, they're probably not going to like me for saying you got to come the day before, but that's just how it is. And for
Mhm.
the sake of the trip, that's what we need to do. The next one is going to touch on something that we've covered a couple times in the past, and that's the good life side of things. You've put all of this effort into the golf and the transportation and your accommodations and so forth. Don't sleep on your plans for off the golf course because as the captain, if your group walks off the course, the last thing you want to hear is, "Okay, where are we eating?" So, you don't necessarily have to plan a dinner for every single night, but you wanna at least put a handful of reservations on the books. Restaurants overseas are considerably smaller. They almost always will require a reservation in advance. And so if for example, if you've got a late tee time and you're going to be walking off the course at 8 o'clock, or you've got a couple places that you absolutely want to hit. You want to have that dinner at 18 St. Andrews overlooking, the first and 18th. Awesome. Do it. But you got to book it in advance. If you think you're going to roll up with a group of eight, on a Thursday night in July, it's just not happening. So, plan a few dinners, but leave a couple nights open. The best nights often come from just seeing where the road takes you, popping into the corner pub, having some fish and chips, rolling to the next place, whatever it might be. You don't have to etch everything in stone, but cover your bases in terms of those tough spots, the late tea time. You don't want to walk off the course at 8 o'clock and have to figure out dinner. The other is, a lot of times things like distillery tours and so forth, the popular places in particular, thinking of like, say, Glenmorangie, they're gonna book up in advance. And so, if you've got a couple places like that that you're wanting to hit, go ahead and book your tour. A lot of times the distilleries in particular, they might have 2 or 3 types of tours. And so the standard tour at 25 pounds a person, might get booked up and the only thing that's left is the tasting of 30-year whatever, bottles and you're stuck paying 200 pounds a person and that may not be exactly what you signed up for. So don't sleep on those extra things. The distilleries, if you want to book a tour like Connor just mentioned, spa appointments, same thing. Spa at Adair Manor is going to get booked up, so don't sleep on it. If you have folks that want to have massages, book it in advance. Don't let it wait. I think that all of this just goes back to dotting the i's and crossing the t's, Connor. And if that's not your cup of tea, may maybe find a co-captain that can take over and run with the ball.
Exactly. You're definitely right. And speaking of co-captains, sometimes everything doesn't have to lean on the shoulders of the regular captain when it comes to some other things. So next kind of thing here is designate a banker for the trip, as well as a game manager, if you will. So some groups will contact and say, "Hey, does your groups usually do any type of fun games or anything?" And some do, and we'll give some kind of insight into it. But I had a group last year and they were members at the golf club in New Albany in Ohio here, and they did a fun game. They called it the Guinness Cup, and there was a buy-in. There was single matches their last day, and again, Guinness Cup there in Ireland. So they had single matches, Stableford, best ball, but also this doesn't have to be the captain. If there's someone else that may be good at that, have them do that. We had a group too that did the low handicap and the high handicap paired up at Muirfield for afternoon foursomes. That's fun. I don't know the total game, but there's some things that you can do. But leave that maybe to someone else that's part of the group that might be good at that. Doing the games if you want to throughout that. It adds another fun perspective to the trip. The other thing, like I said, is for designated bankers dinners. If you ask if you're at a dinner in Ireland, Scotland, England, pretty much anywhere really in the UK, and say if you're a party of 16, you ask to get all the checks individualized, they're going to look at you like you've got four eyes some places. So a lot of times you are paying for it for the whole thing, or maybe splitting it evenly amongst. The big thing is that we kind of recommend, and Deej can talk a little bit more of it, but it's a Splitwise app. It's essentially a way to kind of keep transactions specifically for dinners, who owes who, and what for dinners. And kind of the last thing there is gratuities. So a lot of times when you are tipping your driver host, that'll be at the end of the trip. So a lot of times like to have the captain get all the funds from everyone, and tip at the end of the trip. So again, that can help there. And then if you are, say you're arriving and you've got a bigger group, and maybe tipping the baggage staff at the club or at a hotel, that's helping you as well. So a lot of times just easier to have the captain or just someone designated for that to tip just one person for the whole trip. Another kind of thoughts there people may not think of, but yeah, designate a banker as well as a game manager if you'd like.
That low handicap, high handicap thing at Muirfield doing foursomes, that had to be a blast. I think we might have to incorporate that into our recommendations for Muirfield. But yeah, the like you said, splitting checks is just not a thing. So don't even ask.
Yeah.
Get the Splitwise app. And I think if I recall now, I use it on some trips, but I'm only usually keying in one or two transactions. I think they limit how many transactions you can key in, but it's awesome. And because you can tell it, here are the 8 names on the trip, and Tom paid for dinner and we split it evenly. You key everything in throughout the trip, and then on the last day you hit settle, and it tells you exactly who owes what to what person. It's super easy, and it might even be worth, if you've got a lot of transactions or something. You might have to pay for the paid app, but if not, either way, it's a great tool to have. But you talked earlier about not being a passive captain. And I think that
Mhm.
that really summarizes so much of it. The desire to reach consensus is, is understandable, and it's something that you should strive to do, because you don't want to have everybody, annoyed with you. You want to try to build some consensus, but
Mhm.
in the end, you're the captain. You're going to have to make some calls. You're going to have to make some calls that maybe a couple people weren't going to be thrilled with, but I keep thinking about there's a scene in Ocean's 11, my absolute favorite movie. Matt Damon is sitting in the bar. In walks George Clooney, and he sets down a plane ticket and he says, "You're either in or you're out right now." And that's kind of the mentality that some of these things you might have to take on. You're either in or you're out. When the proposal comes in and you say, "Hey guys, this is what we're doing," you can't have two or three more people chiming in with, "Oh, well, what about this proposal that I got last year from somebody else?" Or what can we do Ireland instead? Those conversations, there was a time for that much earlier in the
Mhm.
process. When you're getting down to the nitty-gritty and it's time to make some decisions, other would-be captains sliding in with their thoughts is counterproductive. So make those calls. You're either in or you're out. That's what it comes down to. And they're going to be in, and they're going to thank you for it,
Mhm.
because in
Mhm.
the end, all they had to do was show up and pay their bill or pay you and have a great time. And you've done all this heavy lifting for them, set up this amazing trip, and they just got to go and have a great time. It's really,
Yeah.
and that's the dream, isn't it?
It is. It is absolutely. So, just some final thoughts, and I was just thinking of this while we were doing the podcast. I wrote them down, and we were talking about. You mentioned Deej of like sometimes depending on the group, people may not even know each other. Going into it, and I think having some type of meeting beforehand is crucial. So, say if like I had a group that just went over 16 gentlemen from mostly from the Chicago area, and they just with a lot of different things, they ended up doing a Zoom call before they actually got our final marching orders, which is essentially the final itinerary about 2 weeks before they depart from the trip. This is specifically to us, Haversham and Baker, that has every single finite detail of their trip from dinners and such. And they did a Zoom call, all 16 of them. The captain and kind of the co-captain did this. They had, a few drinks, what have you, and just discussed the trip. Any questions, went through packing, all these different things. And that is a awesome captain or co-captain, if you will, that's super detailed. This is what's happening. You're on it, blah, 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 blah. that's great. Or if you're in the same area, maybe doing a dinner beforehand. I mean, our big thing too, with a lot of groups that come from private clubs, and say there's professionals that are on the trip, PGA professionals, and if it's members, doing a dinner beforehand. Some PGA professionals, if it's a Scottish trip, sometimes they can work with their staff, their food and beverage staff, and maybe do haggis, one of the nights, stuff like that. That kind of gets the group pumped up, but goes through all those details and asks those questions, and answers the questions. And if you don't have it, then work with us, and we'll get those beforehand, just so everyone's on the same page before departure. And the other tip I would say is have some backup travelers. We're talking about, you just said it, are you in or you're out? So say if you're shooting for 8 people on this trip, and everyone wants to do the Scotland trip, everyone wants to do the Ireland trip, but until you've got pen and paper or writing down, putting your name to this trip, sometimes people back out at the last minute. So have a couple extras that are in your kind of your back pocket, just in case it happens. Again, everyone wants to do the Scotland trip. Oh, I'm in, but until you really get the dates down, until you put your, pen to paper and sign up for the trip, then you'll know if you're actually in or out. So have those extra 2 people in your back pocket to potentially slide in, to make the trip happen. So that's my final thoughts. I just had them before we concluded.
No, those were absolutely, absolutely awesome. I mean, the concept of a backup traveler, I had not ever considered that, but yeah, you're right. Until that credit card comes out, it's all talk.
Yep.
That's just kind of how it is.
Yeah.
But it's good to have that in the backup, and then the planned dinner. Even if you're not a PGA pro, I bet you could walk up to your chef at your club and say, "Hey, can we do some fish and chips for this group of 8, and get a table together?" And that goes back to the don't assume that they've read the itinerary. So you got
Yeah.
everybody together and you're covering it with them. Everybody's on the same page.
Yep.
What a great,
Exactly.
awesome addition. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Hopefully some great insight for both captains and non-captains alike. But as usual, we will have everything in the show notes and some additional tools and so forth in there for you as well. If you have any questions, DM us on social media or send us an email, golf@haversham.com. But otherwise, thanks as always for tuning in. We will be back again soon with another episode. But until then, we wish you plenty of golf at its finest and life at its best.